I'd like to give thanks to those Aboriginals who were here first in the land on which we stand. And I'd like to thank UBC for hosting me. I'm really sorry to leave 25 phenomenal students. I've had a wonderful time and do appreciate them. And I'd like to acknowledge Bonnie and Pamela for being my long but short-suffering technical help. One can be a media theorist, but can absolutely know nothing about media. So, but isn't that sort of how we all are as academics? So, anyhow, the name of my presentation comes from the book that Joe Kinchel and I have just finished editing, Christotainment, Selling Jesus Through Popular Culture. This is the cover of the book, and the cover is very important to both Joe and myself, because this is when you walk into the Holy Land Experience in Orlando, Florida, which is a Jesus theme park. You go in and you're greeted, of course, with people dressed like you're in Nazareth or Galilee or Gethsemane or wherever, and they ask you your family name, and of course, if you have a different name than your spouse, that's always quite a shock to them. And once you get through that discussion, they pretend to tax you because you're paying your taxes. And then this man is one of the first men you meet. And you see he's standing right in front of the garden tomb. And he is a anthropologist, archaeologist at the park, and explains to you how Jesus indeed did rise from this tomb. And when you walk into the tomb, you see a slab where Jesus lay before he was risen, and there's a sheet, but it's not so much. It's not a Ralph Lauren sheet. It's kind of a shroudy kind of thing, and it's thrown on the ground, and there's a little sign that says, "He is not here, he is risen." And it was very, very interesting to us, because I had always all my life thought that indeed had happened somewhere in Palestine. But no, it was in Orlando. And you're definitely able to go see it. Christotainment could have only ever happened in this particular historical moment with the different social and political influences which we have encountered. We also assert that basically Christotainment is definitely a North American mega phenomenon, while other countries follow behind and have done certain Christotain things. This tends to rest very much in both North America, both in Canada and the United States. Popular culture has always been a source of consternation and aggravation by those involved in fundamentalist or evangelical religion. However, in the last few years, there has been an embracing to one's bosom, as it were, the popular culture that can serve to promote Christ and being saved. And so we see Christotainment as the way of taking Jesus and Christianity and using popular culture to promote it. Of course, it has huge political overtones, political undertones, as well as religious and social. Today I'm basically going to just give a survey of what we're looking at and hit on some of the interesting parts of it, and hopefully you'll look more into it, because it's very, very fascinating. This book, the writers, the people we're working with, are all talking about the appropriation of popular culture for the proselytic effect of conversion to Jesus and saving one from certain death or going to hell. And along with that, we have a political fundamentalism, which, as most of you are Canadians, you've all enjoyed for the last 8 years, although it did sort of start with Reagan. But that idea of that political language, talking about war, talking about the enemy, has nothing to do with really what is happening, but the appropriation of biblical language laden with things like evildoers. In fact, in just editing the book, I was writing the word, and it's a word, evildoers, and it didn't come up with the red line. It's now a word in the dictionary. And that's pretty amazing within 8 years that the word evildoers is not just something you pulled out of John the Apostle, but it indeed really is a word. So we have wars being fought now because of the evildoers, and we know, of course, if there's evildoers, then we must be the good doers. So the importance of the political and social strength of Christotainment is getting huge, and in the first decade of the 21st century is enormous. Over 70 million Americans call themselves evangelicals. Many, many others share this belief. 4 out of 10 view the Bible as the literal Word of God, and the key word there is literal. 84% believe that Jesus is the Son of God. 8 out of 10 believe that they will stand before God on Judgment Day and will face consequences on the Creator's decisions. 1/2 believe that angels exist. Over 66 say that they have openly made an alliance or an allegiance or have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And 59% believe in the literal truth of the rapture from the book of Revelations. This comes from Joe Kinchilow's research on Christotainment. A couple of words that are important in looking at Christotainment, and one would be the word fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is used, and we hear it a lot in the news, especially in regard to Muslim peoples now, because of course we have created, dominant culture has created Muslims as the enemy, and so those evildoers have to have a lot of discussion. And we're constantly hear the word fundamentalist, 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 without saying very often that most Christians in the United States today, or many Christians, 70%, look at themselves as Christians. However, they are fundamentalist Christians. The important thing about fundamentalism is taking the translation of sacred works as literal. Very, very important. So when you read that there's going to be a river of blood, that doesn't mean ketchup. It means blood. And so everything is absolutely literal. There will be 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There will be streets run with blood. Antichrist will come, and all those kind of things that are talked about in the book of Revelation are believed literal. Leslie and Handel, do you want to come sit over here on the table or something? I don't know that we should rate, but that's okay. You can come over and see. Oh, here's a seat right here. Well, yeah, come on in. Fundamentalists believe that those who are establishing definitions about this, so people like me, despise their beliefs. So there's very much a tension. So when people critique or discuss this emerging group of Christotainment, emerging group of religiosity, there's the backlash is they hate us, which is also what you hear politically in talking about the Middle East. They hate our freedom kind of discourse. And we hear that quite often. And the idea of evangelicalism is the belief of the infallibility of the Scriptures. And that deep down, or maybe not so deep for some of the people I know and hear, that we are depraved. And that's very, very important. That the central, that was really, John laughed, so he knew it was directed at him. But the idea that salvation can only be gained through the grace of God. So you combine these, and so we have the evangelical fundamentalist Christian movement. I know you have it here. I'm sure many of you have friends or family or yourselves involved with an evangelical or fundamentalist movement. The mega churches is probably the largest North American signifier, and that's these enormous, enormous churches that we see all over our landscape. Along with that, when we look at Christotainment, we look at the modern, we look at what is in our world today, and what we do not problematize that which calls itself religious. Like, we're not looking at the scriptures, the books, the stories, the clothing, the actions of evangelical Christians that say this is our stuff. What Christotainment indeed is the normalizing of a very unusual fundamentalist evangelical move under the guise of being popular culture and normal. So one of the first things we come to would be the movie by Mel Gibson, Passion of the Christ. Are you able to see that?
This time, this place, misused, mistakes, too long, too late. Who was I to make you wait? Just one chance, just one breath, just in case there's just one left. 'Cause you know
In 2004, the release of Passion of the Christ was a major cultural event. Because Gibson could not get support for it, he footed the bill for the studio. And within a very short time, over 40 million people became viewers of this. Tremendous publicity followed this movie, especially about its anti-Semitic under and overtones by just conservative Christians, not particularly fundamentalist or evangelical Christians. And Gibson also helped orchestrate the publicity with selective showings of the Passion. And he would gear himself on television shows as somewhat of a Hollywood eccentric and sort of one who would wanted to admit his past sins and actually wanted to attain salvation. He insisted that his film was not indeed anti-Semitic and that it was a testament to the truth of Christ and how Christ, this is his quote, how Christ died so that sinners like myself could be saved and enjoy eternal life. However, as we can see, Mel didn't keep his eternal life pass, and he's probably had to start again. As you remember, he was caught by the cops a year or so after the release of the movie, drunking and saying that the damn Jews were the root of all his problems. So even though he is a Christ-like figure, we also see that he does have fallibility as a man. The phenomenon of Passion of the Christ is great, though. The amount of people that saw the movie. I think the phenomenon is those who actually sat through the whole movie. Because I could believe anything, but that was a long movie. And listening to Aramaic, which of course wasn't really Aramaic, because nobody knew what Aramaic really was. But it was very, very interesting. The use of camera, as you saw, the crawling sort of leper kind of hands coming to the feet. Everything was very, very emotive, very dark. Of course, Christ wasn't very dark, but everything else was very dark. And what was also very interesting was the use of rock music, as you heard. The appropriation of very hip rock music, which is actually very good. This is an amazing phenomenon, and anyone who doesn't believe that this movie was a seminal point in the turning part into Christotainment needs to revisit it. He claimed once about his movie that there's a huge war raging, and it's over us. So indeed, the Passion of the Christ starts to do the clarion call to actually incant this idea of war. There's thus us and them, us is them, and them, us and them. Mel claimed that there was persecution in the United States and that he, as a religious Christian, was also part of this persecution. I have to say that in most of my research, most of the work we're doing really does deal with more fundamentalist evangelical Protestantism. Mel Gibson is part of a very, very right-wing Catholic sect, which is very unusual because you see the appropriation in certain ways, but there's definitely a difference between the Protestant and the Catholic appropriation. What was so fascinating about this is that people who normally, Protestants who normally would never have anything to do with any Catholic ideology, bought into this movie, and it started to be touted as almost a saving salvation device within itself. This movie made an extraordinary change to many, many people in the concept of Christotainment. Now, this is a pretty light fare. I'd like to turn now to something a little bit more deep. Bob
Details episode.
Go ahead.
One important phrase has lifted the hearts of children and parents alike.
God made you special, and He loves you very much.
Now, Big Idea presents God Made You Special, a new DVD with 75 minutes of great veggie fun that brings this important truth home in a special way.
There's nothing that says special like colored balloon.
Bob the Tomato and Larry the Cucumber might not have the same recognition as Spider-Man or Barbie or Mickey Mouse, but they are absolutely a force to be reckoned with in today's Christotainment. They are household names in North American communities and not just Christian communities. I have, on many occasions in my large media class, asked my students what they thought the ideology behind VeggieTales was. Only those raised in a particularly conservative Protestant Christian home knew that they were indeed Christian cartoons. VeggieTales is mainstream. It's found anywhere. It just came out on. It just had a huge Hollywood release of a major VeggieTales movie, which you probably can all catch quite quickly. It went into the theaters, then went very quickly to VHS and DVD. Bob, Larry, and the rest of the cast of the Veggie Eccentrics are animated characters that embark on a series of adventures and misadventures under the guidance of God. And it's always a compassionate, understanding, philanthropic Christian God who provides them moments of insight and in a clear, simple, understandable terms, which makes me a little bit more comfortable, because somehow taking words from an eggplant, if it was difficult, would make me feel very uncomfortable. The idea of VeggieTales, I mean, you could go on Air Canada and see VeggieTales. VeggieTales is just part of a normalized, what I call a normalized Christo-normative Christian culture. What we have when we normativize anything is the assumption that whatever we bring into the discussion is the normal. Now, it doesn't mean it is the normal in reality. It just means it's the expected norm. So much as we have a heteronormative discourse in North America, we have a Christo-normative discourse. One might say, oh, wait, but there's Muslims, there's Hindus, there's Buddhists, there's Jews, there's all these other kinds of people. But other, of course, is the steering word. Everyone else is other as compared to the discourse, which is definitely Christo-normative. VeggieTales is a very good example of Christo-normativity. There's an assumption by putting it on TV and by watching children watch it that it just is the way it is. And that, of course, we all believe in this. What's interesting is many parents who are not involved in any kind of religion or church feel that it's holistic, it's safe, big on vegetables. The whole idea makes it a very, very safe kind of construct to have your children watch. So it's very hard to sort of come down hard and say this is a culturally right-wing way of seeing the world. It's very, very safe. However, if you scratch below the surface of Bob and Larry's adventures, you find a very, very important sociocultural tale of religion and values, and in media messaging. VeggieTales is nuanced and it's complex and very, very interesting. And naturally, along with VeggieTales, we have the tie-ins of toys, clothing, books, and all the accoutrements that go on. This is Jesus Camp. We'll just run a little bit of it. Do we have it? Yeah. Yes. This is from a film called Jesus Camp. Or not. That's okay, I can just talk it. That's all right, I'm good. How many of you have seen the movie Jesus? How many of you have seen the movie Jesus Camp? Isn't it fantastic? Yes. Wow. Well, here, maybe we've got a cut of it. Well, no, but we do have me on the website. That's okay, Bonnie. We can just take this right off. Okay, we're good. Let's just stick with it. Jesus Camp is a phenomenon which has grown out all over North America, where children go. No, it's okay. We're really good. Oh, we're.
Kids, you've got to change things. Boys and girls can change the world. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are two kinds of people in the world. People who love Jesus and people who don't.
Where should we be putting our focus? I'll tell you where our enemies are putting it. They're putting it on the kids. How long have you been a Christian?
At 5, I got saved.
Yes.
So this becomes a really interesting, purposeful counter-narrative to how fundamentalist evangelical Christians see the world as being. A world of enemies, of threat, and we have to combat it. So in sending up, I'm afraid they're going to see like my pointers. Actually, they're Joe's pointers. But Jesus Camp, do watch it. Do watch it. It's really a great film. What I like about a DVD or a film like Jesus Camp is it's documentary, but it's without. It just shows it as it is. It's very phenomenological, and there's not a feeling of I don't have to, I can make my own decision about the agenda of the film. The film is done in a very, very intelligent way. But kids go to Jesus Camp, and basically, like, remember making the little lace things, Lara things, and making little plaster of Paris. As they do that, everything they do in the camp has to do with serving the Lord, becoming saved, rededicating themselves to Jesus. What's very, very interesting in these camps is the degree of anger that tends to come out, especially with the teachers. And so all of a sudden a discourse of love and gentleness, which we have always had, so everyone in this room who's grown up has pretty well had the generation of Jesus as a loving, kind, gathering the children. In the last 10 or 15 years, that idea of kind and loving becomes much more angry, militaristic, and demanding. And so Jesus Camp very much follows that kind of discourse. And the next slide, we have lots of toys in Christotainment. One to Believe is an amazing success story in the expansion of Christian consumer culture. The founder, David Soka, says that the number one aspect, the kid is the number one driver of our aspect, the kid and Jesus. And he says that it's all about Jesus. Our goal is to give the faith-based community an alternative to Bratz dolls and Spider-Man. He sent to the Marines tour guide, or toy drive, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of toys. Indeed, about 4,000 of these toys made themselves into packets for children in Iraq a couple years ago. Originally, the Marines had turned it down and said they thought it was inappropriate because Muslim and other Christian children wouldn't want it. However, they eventually relented, and so Iraq now has a tremendous amount of One to Believe toys. One would consider this somewhat propagandized in nature. I don't know. That's just sort of how I get it. The idea, but remember, in Christianity, the missionary zeal has always given toys and food and clothing to people. So it's not unusual to do that kind of thing, but when this kind of toy is presented, and I have a propensity, and it's probably the Jewish shopping gene in me. But if I'm studying something, I have to buy it. I can't just go. And so, of course, now we have stacks in our house of these toys. And I have like a little Jesus walk on water toy. And you get the boat. I'm not kidding. You get the boat, and you get Jesus, and I think Peter, who is probably there. And they're little plastic figurines. I have a fish feeding the 5,000 toy. I have a woman at the well toy. I'm not lying. The other cool thing are the larger toys. These are men that are about this big, and they're very, very buff. And Samson is one of them. They don't have one of Goliath, but they have Samson, and he's a power action figure. My favorite, and I really was going to bring it, but it's just schlepping across the country with luggage was too hard. But the Jesus action figures, I have a Mary, a Joseph, a Jesus, and a Moses, and they have the dot in the back. And if you push them, they quote scriptures for you. And so One to Believe is a huge, mega billion-dollar industry. And of course, Walmart has the One to Believe toys, so you don't have to go very far to go buy them. Along with One to Believe is the idea of Bible Man. Bible Man, has anybody ever seen Bible Man? Bible Man. Bible Man is a popular set of children's videos by Pamplin Entertainment. Very slick. It promotes live stage shows, and it's sort of a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers meets God. Sort of what as my colleague Michael calls him, how Jimmy Swaggart was to Jerry Lee Lewis. One was the good cousin, one was the bad cousin. So you've got the Savior kind of thing going on. You've got Bible Man getting his strength from God. He's able to vanquish his foes, reciting Bible verses. I know that always quiets me down. When he has to fight, he is protected by the shoes of peace, the waist belt of truth, the shield of faith, the breastplate of righteousness, and the helmet of salvation. And he brandishes the lightsaber-like sword of the Spirit, Like all superheroes, of course, Bible Man has his enemies, and he regularly confronts his villainous foes. And one of the most interesting enemies of Bible Man is the wacky protester. Some of his more interesting weaponry includes the waxonic cloud of darkness, which chemically inspires a strong need to be alone. And I tend to have that quite often. The show is also, one might call this camp or kitsch, but I have to say, in all fairness, these are shows that are produced with seriousness in mind. They are outrageous, very, very interesting. And then we can always put our kids to bed with Army of God pajamas. Army of God pajamas. And they are fire safe. Army of God pajamas are $39.95. Can you imagine a kid wearing them? I'm sorry if you're like a representative from this country. You give this to your kid, and your kid gets a stuffed shield and sword to go to bed with to protect him or her from anything that could happen at night. They were inspired by a mother who read Ephesians every night, wanted to give her daughter a safe and secure feeling in the dark. As they read the scriptures, you just having choking. As they read the scriptures, they put on each spiritual and powerful piece of the armor of God to keep them safe and peaceful while they slept. At that moment, God gave me the idea of how wonderful it would be if all children could have the opportunity to put on a pair of pajamas that symbolize the armor of God for the same purpose. That with their belief in Jesus, and that's an important part, with their belief in Jesus and His protection, they will feel safe. So what you have is a religious interpretation, and of course many religions believe, or one, I think probably, that their children would be safe, and if they have a belief, that their belief will somehow shelter them. Where we make the jump to Christotainment is to appropriate popular culture, pajamas, corporate influence, stuffed swords, and armor. And somehow, this simulacral representation of protection is literally translated to something that can indeed protect them. And that's where we get the Christotainment. So the interest we have, the group of us has, is not in scriptural interest. It's not in religious interest. It's in the literal translation of scriptures taken to a corporate level and morphing into this concept of Christotainment. Very, very interesting. One more thing. One of you, or go back to what WWJD said. Remember, this started about, 10, 15 years ago. The idea of what would Jesus do bracelets. Now you can get them on sale. If you enter Risen in the coupon box, you'll get more WWJD boxes or bracelets. Also, you may have heard Frog, fully rely on God. So the idea of cute-seeing up religion is very much a corporate ploy, very marketing geared, something that you indeed can see coming right out of any kind of good advertising think tank. How many of you have seen Revelations? Has anyone seen it? This is really interesting to me because this was on NBC. It was a six episode miniseries in 2005. And when Joe and I first watched it, we were sort of, whoa, because it was sort of like, did we hit the wrong button? Are we on the Global Christian Network? Because we were astounded that this indeed could be on NBC. But Revelations piggybacked on the success of the Left Behind series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins. Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, Tim LaHaye is a preacher. I don't know that Jerry Jenkins is a minister. He's not.
He's not a writer.
He's a writer. Tim LaHaye is a reverend, very well known in the southern Protestant era circles. Very well known religious figures. In 1995, started a series of books called Left Behind. Left Behind is from the premise of the rapture as told in the end of the New Testament, that before Jesus comes back to earth, before the Antichrist comes, that there will be a rapture. And in the rapture, all those that are worthy will disappear, leaving us, those that are left behind. And so the series of books, which I think is up to 10 or 13 episodes, or 13 books now, the series of books follows what is going on in leading up to the last days, the introduction of an antichrist, the introduction of signs and wars and rumors of wars taken straight out of the Revelations, an eschatological, apocalyptic view of how the world is going to end. And so Left Behind has sold, up to this point, over 70 million copies of the book. And if there's ever a new book debuted, you can go into a Walmart or a Sam's Club, and you'll see that they've redone the whole store so that they make a mountain of books of these books. Hugely celebrated. Very, very interesting. Interesting, again, like the Veggie Tales, some people, and this I couldn't quite figure out, but some people have actually read these thinking they were just science fiction, not realizing the Christianized agenda. I think by the time they got to the 13th one, they figured it out. Revelations is an echo of Left Behind. It indeed is about Bill Pullman, who is an astrophysicist, and a gorgeous young nun who are searching against time, because they hear of a virgin birth, a little baby, and the coming of the Antichrist. And very, very interesting. It was written and created by David Seltzer, a conservative Jew who refuses to acknowledge it had any religious undertones or overtones. Every 4 or 5 minutes, a Bible verse would come on the screen, reinforcing what was going on. I'm pretty well familiar with the book of Revelations, and I was just astounded at how literal they had followed it on this show. This is available on DVD, and is certainly very, very interesting. Now, this is an all-time favorite. 1970. You'll recognize the people. We'll just watch this for a minute. Mainstream Hollywood film. You might recognize Punch from Chips. See Pat Boone without a tan? Now, Punch, or Eric, went on to star in Chips and also went on to get arrested by his wife for beating her. What's really interesting is he's a gangbanger, so he got the spirit from Pat Boone. He wasn't wearing white buck shoes in this, by the way. This was a preacher who just felt called to go to the hood, so he went to New York City, found Estrada's character, and through a series of, his prostitute girlfriend almost dying and mainlining heroin and gang wars, somehow came to the feeling that God loved him. And he was reassured by Pat, or by the minister, that indeed God did love him no matter what he did. So obviously I would convert too if somebody said I could do anything I wanted and still have protection. And so Eric Estrada brings in a very interesting Christo-normative text through this film, because this is not a religious film. This is a mainstream Hollywood film with this message, tapping on the importance and the popularity of Pat Boone from the 50s. People reinvented Pat because he had always been a religious Christian, reinvented him into this role. You will find in a lot of Christo-tainted movies now that they are bringing, like Bill Pullman, tapping in Lou Gossett Jr., big-time actors who may be Christian or not, but they're definitely not evangelicals, that get taken into these roles. The Left Behind movies, of course, star our favorite Kirk Cameron as the charismatic journalist. And it's very, very interesting because it was Kirk Cameron in those films, he has a huge following. So the idea of blending and making a pastiche, I just ate pistachio, a pastiche of the difference between Hollywood, religion, fame, and you're starting to see a whole woven weft of what's going on. Next one. This is very important. I'd like to thank my filmmakers, Pamela, Chow, and Bonnie. This is a UBC production. I'd just like you to look at this and we'll talk about NASCAR. Of Jesus and belief is combined with NASCAR, which is the largest growing sport in the world. This is an ad about NASCAR. Oops. Wrong one. Stop. Yeah. Yeah. I'll talk about NASCAR for a minute. Oh, that's okay. If we lost it, we're fine. NASCAR is races for Jesus, not all NASCAR, but what is the largest growing group of voters in really coming up in North America. They consider themselves part of many of Christians in NASCAR consider themselves warriors for Christ. They have a conglomeration of NASCAR drivers, owners, vendors, media personalities, and fans who use NASCAR as a proselytory tool. They call themselves NASCAR Nation, which is basically a double entendre that refers to the imagined spectator community dominated by mostly white, small, rural, small-town American Southern fans, and to the conservative American nationalism as brought by the current President George Bush. Christianity and race car culture have always really had quite a tight bond because it very much is a Southern discourse. The articulations of Jesus Christ and politics and stock cars have all made it very, very important that even people looking for political office will address the NASCAR Nation as part of their fan base and political voters. Do you want to try it?
Some people are racing for points, and some people for position. But we're racing for its salvation.
Team up with Morgan Shepherd. With your financial support, we can have an impact for Jesus Christ through NASCAR.
Help us share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Help Morgan Shepherd and Victory in Jesus Racing.
We rely totally on contributions. Your tax deductible
It's very
will be used to reach
interesting
people.
that while one is enjoying the sport or the film or the cartoon, the lack of problematizing and understanding is what's always missing in the discourse. There's never a question by the watchers of NASCAR, how does Jesus exactly fit into this? And I did a lot of research on films in which fallen people, and it was interesting how sports and football tend to be a repeating motif or theme within a lot of Christotain films. And what was interesting is the idea that God would actually have the time or interest in trying to get a team, to have a team win, or to win the race, or to remove things, without the double consciousness of what the hell else happens to the other people. Like, why would God, take care of my team, but let so many people die in a tsunami. And that was never problematized. And I found that was very naive, very, very interesting. Yeah, good, let's go. We're going to show you Hell House real quick. There are Hell Houses all over the United States and Canada. They're held for a month every Halloween, sponsored by Christian churches. It's like a haunted house.
So what are our themes that we deal with in House? We deal with family violence. We deal with suicide. We deal with abortion. We deal with drugs. We deal with alcohol, drunkenness.
Welcome. Your journey has finally brought you to the place of eternal.
The idea of a Hell House is to scare you into being saved. Youth groups are theater-type students. They create 7 houses in a room, and groups are ushered through each room watching a depiction of an ecstasy, a gay wedding where the next room, of course, when you walk in, is one of the partners is dying of AIDS. An abortion scene where there's dead Cabbage Patch dolls all over the ground. And then at the end, the devil asks you, which room do you take? If you accept Jesus into your life, you go to this room, and there's waiting missionaries to help you with conversion. And if you go to this room, then indeed you are going to a certain hell. The message of Christotainment, pretty heavy stuff. In CBS's Big Brother in the 9th season last year, 3 groups of the house guests called themselves Team Christ. They were convinced that every time they won a competition or won something in the Big Brother house, that Christ was with them, which made me wonder for 3 months where Christ wasn't if he was so busy in the Big Brother house. The idea that Team Christ was articulated in mainstream CBS TV reinforced to me the Christonormativity that had come to be expected on the North American television landscape. Indeed, in popular music, we see the same thing. This is Creed, a very strong, multi-billion-dollar Christian group. The use of this kind of music, as you saw with Belle Gibson, is taking once again that which is popular, that which is cool, and combining it in order to reach out and to convert to youth and to people who normally would not be converted into a right-wing Christianity at such a young age. I want to leave. The last thing I want to do is show a slide from a mainstream television show which aired for 11 years on North American TV, syndicated to millions and millions of homes in the world.
When I see their happy faces smiling back at me, seven heaven, I know there's no greater feeling than the love of family. Where can you go when the world don't treat you right? The answer is home. That's the one place that you'll find. Seven heaven, seven heaven, seven heaven.
The concept of a bucolic, banal, ordinary, white, middle-class, multi-childed American family home is often the message that we get through Christotainment on television. We had it in Touched by an Angel, Highway to Heaven, Seventh Heaven, Joan of Arcadia, and you see the break between those recent shows as compared to shows like Father Knows Best or Ozzie and Harriet. There was an implied, maybe even a Protestant implication that people were somehow Christian, but there was never any kind of overt attempt at conversion. Now, the creators of Seventh Heaven always insisted there was not any overt religious message. Indeed, the father was a minister at Mount something church. You had no idea what it was, but it was always that Christo-normative expectation that everyone was indeed Christian and everybody was indeed on the same page. I believe that it's very important for us as teachers, as social workers, as people involved in cultural work, to insist within our curriculum and within our curriculum of life and in schools that our students are given some form of media literacy, to be able to take a critical look at things. I have no objection to people listening to Creed, watching Seventh Heaven, or indeed playing with a veggie tail. But I would, playing with the tail, playing with the vegetable. But what my question is, how much are these tacit, insidious messages put within our system in order to create a Christotainment and a political, cultural dynamic that becomes very, very serious in this day and age? And with that, I leave you with my final thank you slide, giving a tribute to the people that have helped me, and a t-shirt that you can enjoy for yourself. Thank you very much.
We have about 15 minutes for questions, discussion, comments. Salvation. 10 minutes for salvation.
Hi.
I'm going to dare to ask a question because I was raised Catholic, and I consider. Do you ever think? My question is this: do you ever think that you're just hitting a big, large target? And what comes to mind? I saw Jesus Camp. I loved it, and unlike Jesus Camp, I'm left with a different feeling after hearing yours. And I'm curious if it reminds me of the joke that stand-up comedians were not supposed to make anymore. One of them was chicken nuggets. Which part of the chicken did the nugget come from? This, judging by the titters in the room and the recognition in the room, that we're all in on the joke. Is there another side to this at all, or?
Well, I think the other side is everything that's Christotained. And I'm speaking to a particular audience, too. I mean, I think people who came, saw the title of the speech, expected it was going to be a cultural studies, probably a left reading of
yes, of course,
religious.
Yeah.
And if this were a mainstream group, I would have hit it much softer. I would have done the same things.
Yeah.
But I would have been, and I had such a short time, I would have spent a lot more time. For instance, if it was my class, I would have asked them what messages they received. We would have broken it down into themes and into motifs and that kind of thing. But, at a 45-minute speech, I wanted to be funny and light, and that was my intent. I believe that in our society, we are so constantly Christo-normativized that I don't think there's much anything that myself or anyone else in this room can do to actually bring up any kind of representation that goes near the power of Christo-normativity. I believe that it is probably the most serious, most political, most insidious power that there is on earth today. I really believe that. I think we saw with Tony Blair, we're seeing it now with Stephen Harper, and we certainly have seen it with George Bush. The idea that even political meetings are Christo-normative, that there's not even a concept that there would be some different way of seeing the world is pretty frightening, and I think that it has a lot to do with why the world is in so much chaos, especially in the Middle East. It was so easy for 9/11 to create a Christo-normativity reaction against Muslim other. I think it started in obviously many years ago during the Holocaust. It was easy to do it against the Jews, and the norm, and then so I don't feel uncomfortable about it at all. I mean, I just feel like it's sort of saying, are you shoving your agenda down someone's throat? Not when it's been shoved so much farther down ours.
Well, I think I appreciate bringing things to our attention that we might not have noticed. I think we always have to be careful about the idea of evildoers, and not also, even in our investigations or inquiries into the things that surround us, that we're also not casting that kind of net over others, that what's being represented here, and in essence, the reason that we're able to have this presentation is because these ideas, these beliefs, these philosophies are being mediaized. They're becoming visible where before they would have been obvious within a church community that gathered and had shared these kinds of ideas and had this kind of thing. But the reason that we're able to see it and understand it and maybe start to pay attention to the product placement of Christianity in media is because the possibility is there for it to be brought to the surface. And so even as this is being brought to the surface so that we can consider it and think about our values, the principles, what guides us in our work, it's also the very fact that this is occurring also makes it possible for us to have the conversation. And that what is occurring isn't different. It's that it's visible now in a way that it wasn't visible before.
You had me, except for that it isn't different. It is different. It is. I mean, it's like we all have grown up, I would imagine most everyone who's grown up in the West or in North America, we've all grown up around Christians, whether we be them or not. But the idea of tapping into the popular, into the absolutely not sort of seen, into the insidious is not something that we are always used to. It's not. It's very, very new. Like, we did not have Christian cartoons growing up. We had gospel, and it's very, very, because I was thinking about gospel the other day, because I like gospel music. And I was thinking about gospel, and why does gospel music not bother me? And why does maybe a group like Creed bother me, besides the fact that I like the gospel better? But the idea that gospel music was very much labeled as such, I knew where it came from, and I knew what it was. Leslie?
I think the biggest difference epistemically is tapping into the secular realm and using it as commercialized popular culture to articulate white, heteronormative Christian values. Those other things that were identifiable were not secular. And this is also on a global scale. So the articulation of the secular through the articulation of those values through in secular spaces using secular cultural forms is the big shift.
And I think it's a huge shift.
that is not inconsequential or innocent in the sense of, well, thanks for making us all have to enjoy this stuff in secular spaces. It's like we can't afford to ignore it. That is for sure. But what makes it insidious is it's everywhere, as opposed to spaces we could readily say were contained or confined or belong to specific groups. No, you can't say that.
That's right. It readily identifiable, and I think that was the key. Rochelle?
Yeah, I am from America, Indiana, and of course right now we're dealing with getting Bush out of office. And pray for us. Regardless of their religion or lack thereof. And one of the things that's happening, let's say with Obama, one of the things that's happening, there's a certain type of Christianity that's accepted and another part that's not. So with Obama, there was this thing with Reverend Wright, Trinity Church, and how he was portrayed through YouTube, through little snippets. And so you really didn't get a feeling for what Reverend Wright was talking about. This was a dynamite pastor of a wonderful church in South Chicago, but in YouTube, all you got was little snippets. So there was this thing against Obama and Christianity, and then at the same time, he was portrayed as being a Muslim. So it's like he was a Christian, but the wrong type of Christian, while simultaneously being a Muslim based on who his parents were, where he grew up. So it's not as clear-cut as this, or maybe it is as clear-cut as either you're the right kind
or the
wrong kind.
Yeah.
Which is, to this day, after 15 months of campaigning, this argument is still going on in the states as far as the politics are concerned around religion, and he's still being hit upon.
Well, I think his Christianity, besides the Muslim aspect, is he's the black kind of Christian. And I think that makes a huge difference, because in Christonormativity, it is definitely a white discourse.
Well, even the white, I can't remember his name, but he's the one that did the, during his sermon, he made fun of Hillary Clinton. He has a large black following, and a lot of people understood what he was talking about. And so there is just this different way of looking and understanding and accepting.
Right.
I personally love Reverend Wright, and a lot of what he said is true. Damn America, in certain
Exactly.
ways.
But the more we both their Marxism and their religiosity, in fact, going into the homes of liberation theologists, very interesting to see people like Gramsci, Marx, and Adorno on the shelf right next to a crucifix. And I think that that becomes part of one's own individual understanding of religion without the hype. I mean, this is the postmodern genre of the hype. And I think, and somebody was very smart to come into it. I believe that it's very, very interesting.
Let's take 3 more questions, and we'll start right here,
I'm
and
sorry.
then Mina, and over to you.
I just want to make a comment on how Christianity has been commercialized. Because I was just watching that slide about Armor of God, PJs, and to me, I think that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's like commercializing these kind of products, but then the mother who was giving this kind of pajamas to the kids, they think that, oh, this is going to protect the kids. But in fact, it's not the pajamas that's protecting them, but that is really God is protecting them. So it seems like the people are just trying to make a business of it.
Well, they are, but what's so scary, remember, you aren't going to buy anything unless you're sold on it. And what scares me is the consumers buy into it, because it is so naive, it's so banal, it's so simple. I mean, it seems so obvious that pajamas can't protect you. So when you know that a large portion of the voting public is metaphorically clothing their children in these pajamas, that cites a real alarm bell for me. So it's this whole genre, it's the whole joie of the way of looking at Christotainment.
Well, I just wondered, you talked about ideology, and I think that's really central to this. And so I'm wondering what you see as being within the secular movement, what ideology is kind of has emerged, because just as I look at, like, Batman is a #1 movie right now. Historically, they were saying it's the #1 movie that's made money, and the kind of archetypes within popular culture that continue to emerge as this, that how is that a driving force as well? How does it kind of align itself within the kind of Christotainment and secular? What do you see existing? I guess my question is, within the secular domain, what ideology exists? I don't know if that's a...
Well, there's so many complex ideologies. I mean, I think that there's trends in popular culture and ideological trends. I mean, green is an ideological trend at this point. And consciousness, whether to the right or to the left. But this is a movement larger than a small ideological construct. This is an enormous movement that combines corporate marketing and the toughest and the biggest of corporate marketing with enough power to present their agenda without needing financial help. And that's what's so interesting about it.
Yeah, the prayer comment got me thinking. I mean, when you look at historically in Canada, evangelical Protestantism has been associated with socialism.
That's the irony of it,
yeah,
isn't it?
You know, like Tommy Douglas
Yeah.
and the One Big Union movement, even in the North United States,
Yeah.
like all very, very associated with religion.
Yeah.
So my question is that now that seems to me a more New Testament focused type of religion. Now this evangelical Protestantism, as exhibited by the Hell House and everything, is kind of going to an Old Testament focus on it. Do you see that as a association between why maybe the United States is, after centuries of being radical disassociation between the church and state, is now actually kind of saying, hey, these two things are one and the same, and it's actually not in the Constitution? And
I think you're bringing up some more points. One is, the United States has never been a liberal or a leftist country. It has always been conservative, and we're always told separation of church and states. The United States is one of the most Christian nations in the world. Next to the Vatican, I would say it's probably the most Christian. So to say that it's not a Christian nation, and that's sort of the sell job that has been the PR perks from the United States for many years. But in the 60s and 70s, and then ushered in hugely by the Reagan admission, I mean, the man had never gone to church in his life, and then all of a sudden he's going to church, and all of a sudden church becomes a discourse. He understood that tapping into this invisible Norman Rockwell recollection of the way things should have been, which is Christian, that he could maintain a huge fan base that way. And along with different economic and political situations, we have seen a resurgence of Jewish fundamentalism, which is enormous. I was born from an Orthodox father. No one even owned a wig in our community, and now everybody's walking around, 35 children wearing wigs, and all of a sudden being Jewish is a whole different thing. Other than the Muslim movement that we have been shown since 9/11 through the media, being a Muslim was not a proselytic kind of nature. I mean, you know, people didn't run around trying to convert people. There was always the missionary zeal involved. But this convergence of the political and the social and the cultural, topped off by the capital part of what sells, is what's so interesting. And those, as I said before, and then bringing up the idea that Christianity is an incredible socialist construct if you just read about Christianity in that right way. And that's one of the greatest ironies, is the appropriation of huge capitalism by a very socialist way of seeing the world. And that's part of the entire amalgamation of what I probably unpopularly call a postmodern condition. But in the web of reality, with hyper-reality, with the media-driven society of simulacro, and the inability for us to know what is and isn't real, we are able to be taken advantage of in a lot of ways.
That's a great idea. Any last very urgent comments?
Thank you.
Questions?
I thought I'd add one thing.
Yes, Kendrick, talk.
Sure. There's a very key bridging point that seems to be used and runs as a theme through here, which is John of Patmos doing the Book of Revelation, and how that stands completely outside of the canonical version of the Old Testament, or like it's called the Old Testament only out of the New Testament, and how that book really is a whole different kettle of fish as far as what messages are being driven through in terms of its portrayal of hell, which you don't really get in the Old Testament at all. You get Joel, which is Dust Bowl, as compared to this very articulated idea of a vision by a man who was generally considered to be crazy at the time of writing, and how that through the Protestant Bible thumping routine has come to be the representative text of
exactly, and I mean, Joe does a huge amount of work on rapture politics in his writing. But I think it's very important. I mean, being familiar with both the New and the Old Testament, you may know that up until you get to the Revelations, even if one literally interpreted the Gospels, there would not be this type of Christotame genre. It's by reinterpreting and assigning the mythical, the fantastic, the incredibly outrageous to the interpretation of that one particular book of the Bible, which was tagged on at the end, is pretty phenomenal. And there's not an interrogation of that in evangelical Christianity.
That's great. I want to thank Charlene Steinberg very much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much.